Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, I was telling Charlie backstage 4 or 5 years ago, Charlie's coverage of our company kind of put us on the map to begin with. But we've been doing this for almost 6 years, which for those of you in XR know that feels like 10, 12, 15 years. But we've learned a lot. And what I'd like to do today is just share some of the observations, some data that we've seen, especially in the last 6 to 9 months as it relates to the enterprise market. Before I do that, though, I want to take just a few minutes and tell you a little bit about Arbor so you have some context for kind of our vantage point on the industry.
ArborXR started with a simple idea. Using XR in your organization should be easy. Over the last 5 years, we've talked to thousands of companies deploying XR. What have we learned? XR is different. Companies do fine with a few headsets, but as they go beyond that, they get stuck. Managing a fleet of headsets is difficult, from enrolling, distributing to your team, and managing remotely. Traditional MDM solutions aren't working either. They're built for phones and laptops, not headsets. That's why we built ArborXR, device management designed specifically for the challenges of deploying XR. Quickly provision a fleet of headsets, manage thousands of devices, install apps and files remotely with total control, and create an effortless user experience in the headset. We're powering deployments all over the world. ArborXR is device management made easy. Get started today.
So very simply, Arbor is an MDM that's been designed specifically for XR. And with Arbor, you can manage a fleet of XR headsets, you can deploy apps and files remotely, and you can control the in-VR user experience. So I put on a headset for the first time 6 long years ago, and for us, like many of you, this was kind of our aha moment as a company. We were very excited about a new technology that we were confident would have a major impact on the world, and we wanted to be a part of helping shape that new technology for good. So we needed an easy entry point, and the clicker. 6 weeks later, we opened up a virtual reality arcade in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Our friends and family said, "What are you guys doing?" But for us, it was the soft entry point. It was one of the first arcades in the country, first in the Midwest for sure. And it was just this incredible time of getting to see people experience the power of VR for the first time. But we also got to experience the pain of deploying VR in a business setting firsthand. And we kept coming back to the same conclusion that getting into VR should be easy. So 4 months later, we pivot and we launch a software company called Springboardvr, which is the company that Charlie mentioned to get started. And we were focused on 3 things, which was just solving the pain points we were experiencing at our own location. That's managing devices, managing content, and managing users. And over the next 18 months, in this niche within a niche, I like to call it location-based VR, we became a global market leader in the space, and we were working with almost 600 companies in over 40 countries. We had the largest commercial content marketplace for VR, which was a lot of fun, getting to interact with the content creators. But all along the journey, we were looking for a more meaningful application of the technology. And for us, this season was very important for a few reasons. One is that it gave us a tremendous amount of experience. And so I can say objectively that our team, there is not a team that's been solving the challenges of scaling VR for as long as our team has or at the scale that we have. This time also gave us a lot of great access to several of the large players in the space, which has really helped get us to where we are today. So along the journey, we were doing deep dives into education and enterprise because we were looking for that more meaningful impact application of the technology. So 2019, we finally see the market starting to heat up. Before that, the timing wasn't right. There was no standalone headsets, and the tethered headsets just wouldn't work. You couldn't scale with those in education or enterprise. But by 2020, we start to make the pivot. We sell Springboard. We rebrand as Arbor. And today, we're fully focused on solving the challenges of deploying XR in the enterprise market. We're working with over 600 companies in over 60 countries, and we're working with everybody from small ISVs and content creators all the way up to the Global 2000, several dozen of the Fortune 500 as well, and lots of large deployments. So one of our largest deployments is quickly approaching 20,000 devices. So we've gotten a lot of experience kind of in a short amount of time here in the enterprise space deploying XR. We also have a couple key partners I want to mention. We had an announcement last week with Qualcomm. So Qualcomm's been great. Qualcomm has identified that there are still a lot of friction, unfortunately, to deploying XR in an enterprise setting. And they've taken that seriously. So they approached us to be their preferred MDM, and we're working closely with them at the Snapdragon platform level to better integrate with hardware companies, kind of with the goal of zero-touch provisioning, which I think will be very helpful for the industry. We've also worked with HP for almost 2 years. Earlier this year, HP announced that they're selling a white-labeled version of our platform. But the journey with HP has just been super helpful for us. We've gotten access to their big customers over the years to help inform the product that you'll see today, as well as just it's forced us to level up as a company. When you've got to go through HP's security audit and their QA process, it really forces you to take it to the next level. So, observations and data. There's 4 areas that I want to talk about today from our perspective. And I shared we've got over 600 companies, so maybe it's not the largest sample size on the planet, but it's a decent size for XR today. And so I just want to share some of the things we're seeing from our perspective, kind of from the front lines. And I want to hit the market, device types, content types, and then legacy MDMs. So let's start with the market. For us, this is super encouraging, and I hope it will be for you as well. We have seen a pretty steady growth in our inbound signups every month of 20%. So it's exciting. You see, you wake up every day and you look at what companies have signed up. But I think what's more important is not just an increase in the quantity of signups, but the quality. So today, this is kind of the breakdown of companies by size on our platform. So over almost 65% of the companies have more than 1,000 companies. 35% are 5,000 employees or more, and then almost 15% have over 10,000 employees. So these aren't small mom and pop companies. It really is kind of the who's who of the Global 2000 that's finally taking VR training in enterprise and even in healthcare seriously. Here's a breakdown by industry if you want to take a snapshot of that. This is interesting. Number 1 is education. And we've seen in the last probably 4 or 5 months in particular, the signups from universities has just been kind of through the roof for us. Also, architecture, engineering, and construction comes in second with almost 20%. IT, healthcare, those are kind of the big 4. Healthcare is another one observationally that over the last 4 or 5 months, we've seen, again, who's who among big healthcare companies taking VR seriously. And not just for training, but for therapy applications, which is, again, a very positive sign for the industry when you've got the FDA approving VR to be used in those types of settings. Another observation. So typically, when a company approaches us, there's kind of a 3-step process they go through to get to scale. The first step is the pilot. In the pilot phase, you have the VR champion within a large company who's done a lot of work. They've had to come up with the idea of VR. They've had to sell leadership on it. They've had to pick a headset. They've had to find a use case. And the pilot phase is typically under 50 headsets. Once that gets a little bit traction, then they go to the initial deployment. At that point, IT starts to get involved. The VR champion is still involved, and now we're at a few hundred headsets. And then from there, we go to full scale. Now we're in the thousands. At this point, it's predominantly run by the IT department. The VR champion is typically still involved. And so one of the things that we've done just recently in kind of an effort to just further remove the friction is we've upped our free device limit to 50 devices to make that initial pilot just as easy and frictionless as possible. Next, I want to talk about the device types. So here's the breakdown. Probably not a big surprise here. Maybe it's a surprise that Pico comes in just ahead of Meta, but it's the big 3. It's Pico, it's Meta, it's HTC on our platform. This is the breakdown. What I want to do is I'm going to just quickly go through these 3 device types, kind of hit some pros and cons of each. But most importantly, I want to spend a little bit more time on the Oculus. There's some challenges there that I'll walk through. So the Neo 3. The Neo 3 is a great headset. It's designed for enterprise use, so there's not a lot of data privacy concerns. They've got a great out-of-the-box kiosk mode, and it's kind of middle-of-the-road price point. Some of the downsides are it is more expensive than the Quest. It's not as expensive as the Focus 3. The kiosk mode, the native kiosk mode, isn't great at scale, and it is a little bit heavier than the Quest. The Focus 3, kind of the best in class. It's the most expensive, longest battery life, best resolution. Also offers a native kiosk mode. It's designed more for the enterprise use case. Again, like the Pico, there aren't a lot of data privacy concerns, which is not a small thing. It is expensive. It's the most expensive headset. And again, like with the Pico, the native kiosk mode doesn't work great at scale. And then the Quest. I think we all know dollar for dollar, Quest is the best there is right now from a price point perspective, from a quality perspective. But there are some challenges. And I'm going to go through 7 of these. I will hit these fairly quickly. We actually just put a blog up this week that goes more in detail on each of these points. And I would highly recommend, if you're either deploying with Quest and Enterprise or considering it, to check that blog out. We go in depth on each of these points. We also have a few customer tips that I'm not going to share publicly, but you can check out on the blog. So first, Oculus for Business is shut down. I think we all know that. It feels like I was here, I guess, November, a few months ago after that announcement had been made. So the implications of that are that since Oculus for Business shut down last fall, any new headsets purchased are the consumer headsets. And with the consumer headset from Quest, there is no native device management application, which is a real challenge if you need to scale. Second is that every Quest, you have to have a Facebook and an Oculus account, which is a huge pain in an enterprise setting. And there's several ways that companies deal with this. This is one of the points where we have a customer tip on our blog. But there's kind of 2 ways you could go about this. You can either use one Facebook account for multiple devices, and if you're using custom content, that works pretty well. If you are using content from the Quest store, you have to have a single account for every headset, or otherwise you can't launch the content. So if the other option would be to allow your employees or your students or whatever the case may be to use their own Facebook accounts, but in that scenario, you have no control over the type of content that may be going onto the headset. So there's some challenges there. Next is getting the Quest into developer mode. So the Pico and the HTC headsets ship to you in developer mode. And the headset's got to be in developer mode if you want to sideload content, which everybody's sideloading content in the enterprise space. Also, if you want to sideload an MDM, it's got to be in developer mode. So there's several steps that you have to go through, several manual steps to get that consumer Quest into developer mode. It doesn't come that way out of the box. Fourth is the Facebook account, again, complicates things when it comes to the MDM, because the Facebook account has to be removed before you can install an MDM and then re-put on the device. So one comment I'll make right here, as we go through this and even as we talk about legacy MDMs, there's a lot of little challenges that if you take any one of them on their own, it's not that big of a deal. It's overcomable. But it's the sum of the challenges, and especially if you're moving beyond 15 or 20 headsets, that it really just becomes pretty impossible to deal with some of these challenges without a good solution. Number 5, the Quest home environment limits third-party launchers. So again, it's a consumer device. It has a consumer launcher where the user can access the web, the user can access the content store, and you don't want that happening in your enterprise setting, education and therapy, whatever it may be. And the way they've set up the launcher makes it pretty challenging for companies like us actually to come in and lock that down. We've worked around that to some degree, but just another challenge to be aware of. Number 6, firmware updates. So Pico and HTC are great with working with us and other companies to allow the enterprise to manage when the firmware updates happen. That's not the case with Meta. They come out when they want to come out. Oftentimes, they break the support of applications like ours. And then 7, Meta's data privacy. I think people my age at least, we love to just like scroll and click. We don't ever read the terms of service. But I would encourage you to check that out a little bit. On the blog, we've taken screenshots of some of the things that they do capture. And I think it's just something we all have to be mindful of when you compare the big 3 companies, at least for now. I know ByteDance has kind of entered the scene. Facebook makes money off ads. HTC doesn't. Pico hasn't historically. Content type. So some observations here on the type of content and where content is coming from. First, this may be no surprise, but for the most part, outside of education, almost all the content is custom or bespoke content. And almost all the content we see on our platform is not being developed in-house. It's being developed by third-party ISVs or content creators. Now, I think you may have all seen Axon recently acquired Foundry 45. Axon has one of the largest 6DoF deployments in the world. Foundry 45 is a very legit ISV. So I think that might be a trend that we see coming in the coming years. These large companies, once their VR projects get to scale, they start to acquire some of these out-of-house content studios. In education, the most used content is actually Quest Store content. And then the third thing here, which I think is very interesting, is that the ISV or the content creator, in many cases, is acting as the MSP, the managed service provider, which I think is just very indicative of where the market has been. I think we're kind of shifting out of this, but a great example of this is Pixo. Pixo is a content creator. They also source content. They make great content. Pixo works with very large companies, Ford, Bosch, Saudi Aramco, And Pixo does not play the role of just creating content and shipping it. They actually manage the deployments on behalf of these large companies. So just another kind of interesting observation for where things are at in the industry today as it relates to content. And then last is the legacy MDM. So what we have found, and we've been on a journey ourselves with this, but the conclusion we have come to again and again is that legacy MDMs like VMware, like Intune, are really failing companies in XR today because they just haven't taken it seriously. And there's three reasons that I want to hit today. So one is application support, another is user experience, and then third is the in-headset experience. So when it comes to application support, legacy MDMs are designed for cell phones and tablets. Cell phones and tablets are Android enterprise devices, and so they're able to utilize Google mobile services and the Google Play Store. Also, with cell phones and tablets, you aren't pushing files that are as big as the files we push in VR. So there's several challenges here. One, they do not do a good job pushing large files. Two, there's very little visibility on when a file is pushed. Scheduling the time for the update, scheduling the time for the content to be downloaded, or even being able to tell if the content has finished downloading. You're putting on headsets. Again, if you're going to put on 10, it's not a big deal. If you're trying to provision 1,000 devices, I don't know who wants to have the job to go put on 1,000 headsets to see did the content get pushed to the headset. They also don't do things like differential updating, which again is a big deal when you have large files. It takes a very long time because they're fully uninstalling the file and then reinstalling a new file every time there needs to be an update. Another kind of byproduct of where we're at in the industry right now with the custom content is that content creators are pushing updates pretty frequently, and they also are getting in a pretty tight feedback loop with enterprise customers. So having the ability to manage different versions, having the ability to get the data analytics, which is not provided here with these legacy MDMs, is very important. Next is the user experience. There's a couple things here. So first, the web console is kind of very challenging for legacy MDMs. Oftentimes, you've got to go through a certification course to even be able to utilize a legacy MDM. Another issue is that almost all of the functionality, all the functionality has been built for the cell phones and tablets, and a lot of it does not even work for XR devices. And there's no indication within the web console which features work for XR and which don't. So it's a very challenging process. And then the other one is the initial deployment. And this is still, if I had a list of like biggest friction points for deploying XR, it's the initial provisioning of the headsets. And that's one of the things we're working on with Qualcomm that we're excited about is bringing zero-touch provisioning. But with a legacy MDM, it's a 4 or 5-step process per device to get the device initially provisioned, which is just a lot of work when you're at scale. And then last is the in-headset experience. And this is very important. I think a lot of times people think about the in-head experience as a nice to have, and it is nice to have, but it's also necessary. I mean, half the reason an MDM exists is to bring security to devices. And without having the ability to lock down the in-headset experience, there is no way to have a secure device. Otherwise, you've got employees getting into the web, you've got employees getting into other apps, the content store, things that you don't want them to get into. So the legacy MDMs don't really touch this at all, which is a huge, huge challenge. And then second, there is no NVR single sign-on. Right now, in VR, in XR, unlike cell phones and tablets, it's not a one-to-one relationship user to device, it's a one-to-many. So it's very important that you're able to actually determine which user is getting into which device, which user is getting into which piece of content, and then track that user and the results of their time in training. So that's something that is also not offered by legacy MDMs. So this is why we built ArborXR, specifically to solve these pain points. I'll leave this up for a second, take a shot. This is kind of a breakdown of where, from our perspective, the traditional MDMs fall short and how we've addressed a lot of these challenges. So, in closing, I hope you're all as encouraged as we are. I mean, we're on the front lines, and we're seeing the signups come in. We're seeing the big companies do large deployments. So we very much believe now is the time for XR. It's also, if you're thinking about doing any type of scaled deployment, you've got to have an XR specific MDM. It's just not possible. And I would love to argue with you after this if you think it is. And then last, we'd love for you to come by our booth. We start a free trial. Like I said, we go up to 50 devices free to kind of take the pain and some of the friction out of that initial deployment. We are right when you come into the exhibition hall, right to the right. We're booth 400. And I'll meet anybody at the back that wants to chat right now. But very much appreciate your time, and hopefully we can help you scale your deployments.